Hi, gentlemen. Thanks for joining today for this debrief on Amazon AWS's 3 weeks sort of extravaganza. It was spread across 3 weeks because of the COVID crisis this year. We all know that everything's going virtual and everybody's doing it this way. Thanks for joining. And I wanted to cover this with you folks being sort of well versed in this and being thought leaders out there. If we can sort of riff on these announcements from three different angles. One is what is in it for Amazon, where Amazon is headed. When I say Amazon, that means AWS. So where AWS is headed with the services and what their plan is, how do you see it? The second aspect is what does it mean for the other industry suppliers like VMware, Dell, Azure, and Google Cloud, and others, how it impacts the whole sort of greater industry from the supplier side of things. And the third thing, which is I think is most important, is that what does it mean for the buyers of technology, like how they will consume it? Is it getting too complex for them to consume? How about hybrid? Are they trying to redefine the hybrid to their advantage and stuff like that? So with that, I think let's start with the first sort of um, um, key aspect, which is what does it mean for buyers of the technology, the new announcements, and what do you like, um, what did you like hearing during these 3 weeks, and what does it mean for the buyers of the technology? I will start with let's say Ian. You're from. Let's start with you. You're far from us right now in the
Yeah,
UK.
so you know, I still think it's a three-horse race. We've still got what I call the magic, the Microsoft, Amazon, Google, and they address a lot of the time. What I see is they address different arenas, and a lot of it is driven by the application. I've seen this before, and if you look at enterprises out there, whilst we talk about a Microsoft house or an Amazon house, think about where we came from, and for the customer we used to have Unix, we flavor Unix, but you'd have a bit of Land Manager or a bit of NetWare or a bit, etc., often driven by the application layer. And it's still happening today. Whilst you'll talk to a corporation and they'll say, well, most Microsoft, okay, have you got any of these other platforms? Yeah. They're multi-cloud, they're hybrid. And often it's because of the nature of being driven by the application stack, not because they've chosen, we want a bit of AWS, we want a bit of Azure, because an application that is business, driving the business, driving the outcome for customers and their internal customer happens to be on a particular platform. And I think that's, for me, that's, the race that Amazon's driving is innovation. It's pushing everyone to, you have to fight your corner, and the race to zero, bring the cost down and bring the function up. And I think what we've just seen is that a perfect example of that. The costs are reducing for the customer, which is never a bad thing as long as the provider is profitable and successful and is going to be there. And the function is going up. When have we ever seen that historically, where you're gaining more richness as a customer, but you're getting more value for money? And I think that's the big thing we've just seen here, because the breadth of announcements they put out there across so many areas, whether it be, DevOps platforms, telecoms, the breadth, IoT, it wasn't just one area. They've got their fingers across a lot of the infrastructure now. So that's where I'd start the discussion from.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. I We were talking about the cube earlier. Rob and I were there. We were talking about how they were more focused in the past on more developers, and now they're trying to focus on operators. I'll let Tim go next, and Tim, give your take on what these announcements mean for the buyers of technology.
I think Amazon is continuing to kind of beat the drum of bringing new innovations to the mix. There was a conversation or comment earlier on a different thread about Amazon's really not inventing, they're not innovating, they're just repackaging. And I think to some degree, maybe that's true, but quite frankly, it's how they execute that matters. And being able to provide tools that are at the time of need is going to be really critical. And so I think, when you look at the entire portfolio, it's an incredibly strong portfolio with a number of different ways, whether you're looking at it from the different types of instances, if you're looking at it from the more sophisticated services. But there are a couple things that really stood out this year for reInvent for me. And I've attended reInvent for a number of years now. And that is that they're starting to go horizontal. So it's not just vertical in terms of going from instances for public cloud into outposts to wavelength and down to silicon, but they're starting to go horizontal in each of those. We saw two new outpost instances that give a smaller footprint, which then opens the door to other potential application types of opportunities. But the other horizontal piece that I thought was really interesting was kind of to Ian's earlier point. They're starting to acknowledge that companies are using different public cloud providers. And so some of the tools that they announced this year really exemplify that. I agree with Ian. Companies, at least the enterprises that I'm working with, they are not doing this as some form of arbitrage. There is a public cloud provider that becomes their primary, and then they might use a secondary provider or tertiary provider for specific uses. And so opening the door to that, I think is a really smart move on Amazon's part. And then the last thing I'll say for the buyer is that they're starting to focus on the verticals. And we're starting to see that pop up in a couple of announcements over the last couple of weeks. And I think that's a smart move on their part. Kind of to your point earlier, where they were focused on the developer. We have to think about how this all ties out at the end. It can't just be, hey, this is cool technology. How do we kind of plug it in? We have to think about what the outcome is. And when you get to the outcome, you really have to focus on the nature of your business and the industry you play in. And so I would applaud Amazon. I think, that's really smart to go after a couple of those. Don't try and eat the whole elephant in one bite, but start with some key ones and kind of branch out from there.
Oh, you mean the vertical applications like call center and stuff?
Well, so yeah, I should probably be clear. I'm talking about specific vertical industries as opposed to the end user app products like Connect and Workspaces and Chime. Those are kind of end user focused or intended to be end user focused. That's a different issue. I'm talking about the industry verticals specifically.
All right. Keith, you go next, then Isaac, and then Rob. Keith, what's your take?
So I think Amazon has the problem that, ironically, that big enterprise companies before them have. They're too big. How do you? And I think Tim can add color to this as well. I remember HPE prior to HPE splitting. They were just too big to deal with. When I needed to surface up solutions, I just couldn't. So what Amazon does extremely well is that if I know what I want to do, I can go to the portal and I can do it. It's not knowing what I want. Amazon is too big in that sense. From when you get to the point where Amazon, I think I saw a headline, is almost a $10 billion storage company now, enterprise storage IT company. That will put them amongst the biggest enterprise IT storage companies. And you look just at the range of their portfolio. If I'm a enterprise that just heard Andy Jassy say they're now, embracing hybrid infrastructure, which means that it's an acknowledgement, and we'll get into the conversation about what does this mean for Amazon. But if you focus just on the customer, as a customer, I already knew that my infrastructure is going to be hybrid. Now I get these solutions. I get a better outpost, which is all good. Better outpost options rather that may fit my environment. I get ECS across multi-cloud. So Andy acknowledged that there's other clouds, and ECS is now available across other clouds. And I've kind of acknowledged and fully embraced this relationship with VMware, and I'm no longer not calling the VMware solution a cloud. Andy, for the first time ever, called the VMware solution a cloud. As a customer, I welcome that, but I'm also just overwhelmed. I don't know if Amazon laid out a path for me other than to say that they see the total addressable market for their services to be all of the IT that I do. And I don't know if I'm ready to have that type of relationship with Amazon. And I think more than anything else, Amazon showed me as a buyer, AWS, and I'm purposely saying Amazon. Amazon, AWS showed me as a buyer that Amazon, AWS, is a Amazon business, and they want every penny coming out of my organization, and they're willing to do that. And I'm not necessarily saying no to it. I'm just saying it's a lot to bite off.
And that now they are a reseller market as well, like core Amazon is, like they sell other people's products, and this reInvent, they now you can get software licenses and solution licenses through the marketplace. So Rob, why don't you go next in the till Isaac fixes his
Sure.
microphone.
No, so Amazon is a fearsome competitor. What Keith is saying, echoes with what I see. They are pushing into every corner. This was a good example of them saying, "Hey, we actually think we want to be on premises and edge, and cloud is not cloud anymore. It's Amazon, and Amazon can be everywhere in every IT category, doing everything for you." And I think that it's it's not a surprise. They've always been like that. They're trying to build a huge vertically integrated system. It's not my favorite thing. I actually think that the ecosystem is much healthier when there's a lot of players in it, and they could see that. But that's just not the way the system's being built right now. And I think one of the things that we saw in today's talk with Werner is the users are starting to say, this is really hard to use, right? They've exploded in capabilities and created a huge conglomeration of servers in a lot of services in a lot of cases without worrying about how those services work together. And so, from that perspective, they're teaching the industry how to do service chaining and API integrations and automation, and it's great from that perspective. But they're also not building a platform that is focused on certain use cases. It's incredibly general purpose. It has weaknesses in it because of its scale that get surfaced in unusual ways. Like we had the big outage where they were trying to add capacity for Kinesis and discovered that they all of a sudden had all these dependencies in there. And at some point, you have to start asking yourself, is our IT environment served by making everybody's IT environments linked together in one giant ball of yarn? And so, I think that what we're seeing in the tech, and this is my dilemma with this. What we see individually, like they had some amazing announcements about AI capabilities, DevOps automation. They had, people really underestimate like the fact that they're doing AI to analyze your DevOps patterns, the way they implemented the Mac OS pieces by literally embedding a physical Mac Mini inside of their chassis and then isolating it with Nitro. Incredible tech. This is amazing stuff. But at the same time, I feel like the compromise to do that is it's all Amazon. It's becoming incredibly monolithic. The idea that you have distributed infrastructure with customer choice and customer control, all those things have had to go out the window for that. And I actually, when we talk to our customers and the enterprise, their classic enterprises and large scale, they want control. They want the consistency that Amazon brings, but they also want control, and they want a degree of choice. And that's not addressed here.
Yeah, I think we usually talk about data gravity, and also talk about skills gravity. I think they have trained a lot of developers. I usually call it it's like a drug. Cloud is like a drug. You get sniff it, and then you're using it, and all of a sudden you're addicted to it. And all those developers are going to work at these companies, and then they carry that skill set with them, and that skills have gravity, and you know something to do, how to do it, and you can do it quickly and with the vendor, and you will do it. And I think they're master of micro releases. I usually talk about it's age of micro consumption. That means any change you want to inject into any entity, it has to be given to them in a smaller chunks, and they release a feature every week or every other week. They're not the old style, like 6 months later I will give you 200 features. No, not once like that. I used to develop that software, PeopleSoft and Oracle at other companies, Commerce One. Like we will build this big giant thing and throw at the enterprise, and they had to deal with it. So with the advent of microservices and as a service on top of that, I think that thing does so sort of magic to these kind of entities, that they can give a lot of stuff to you in smaller chunks, but then at the end of the day it gets accumulated and it becomes a blob, and then now you're like, what do I do with this? So Isaac, is your mic on
You
now?
hear me now?
Yes, we can. Yeah, that's
Awesome.
give us your take on it.
Look, I think Amazon's strength has always been appealing to the developer, giving them what they think are the best tools, the most versatile tools, different ways of using their infrastructure, more knobs that you can pull than you can ever learn. And what I heard Andy in particular selling is that this is the place for enterprises to be, that they have all the services, that they're best in class, that you can work up and down the stack anywhere you want, that they were going to play nice working in a hybrid environment, but I think they're playing nice for their own advantage, right? To be able to move more of your data into their environment, to connect more into your data center so that you don't go somewhere else. And I think that's a very Amazon play that we've been seeing them do through their entire journey into anything that they've gone into. Now, there's a couple things I do think that stand out. More so than just competing with the Microsoft and competing with Google, they're starting to provide higher level application stacks, whether it's their Kubernetes services, their SageMaker services, they're really getting into the application layers. And that's not just competing again with the other cloud players, it's competing with all the other software vendors that are out there trying to provide services in data, in analytics, in AI. I mean, Wrangler is a good example of that. Lots of data prep technologies out there. And now Amazon saying, you don't need it, we can give it to you all as part of SageMaker. So I thought that was one of the more interesting things to play at. And I think the way to really compete, you mentioned skill set, you have to learn a ton to know which sized environments that you need to apply, what the cost structures are, whether you want to play at the PyTorch level or play at the SageMaker level or play at the service level. There's a tremendous amount of knowledge to make really strong architecture decisions, and they're not cheap to unwind. If you build something in one area and you decide, hey, we made some mistakes, we need to unwind and go somewhere else, you're basically re-engineering at a different layer of the stack. So I think, if I'm listening, Microsoft, if I'm Google, if I'm somebody else, I'm like, give me an easy button. Find a way for me to do the capabilities, maybe not to the best in class that Amazon claims it has, but to something that's just a little easier for me to build and support with less skill sets, with easier on-ramps and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think well said there. Great comments from all of you. I think the unwinding from within the AWS stack can be hard. It's not, forget about like you were using other vendors within
Is that
AWS.
is that not the same across all the public clouds though?
It is.
The promise has been that for the end client at a very superficial level, that you've got these public clouds and I can lift and shift as I wish. But as soon as you start taking real advantage of them and using their proprietary APIs to get the real advantage, you've dug your hole, right? And is that not where things like what IBM's done with Redshift and their acquisition, to trying to create an abstraction layer where you code to that abstraction layer to be able to more easily port? So it's creating, I think this is creating new markets and new solutions for management tools to single pane of glass across the multi-cloud, et cetera, et cetera. There's lots of third parties now innovating based on the problem that the Magic 3 are creating, that they promise one thing, but they solve one problem, but create other problems.
Yeah, I usually
Yeah.
say that technology is like medicine. Every pill has a side effect. So, any other comments around?
I was
Go
I
ahead.
was going to jump in and kind of echo some of the others, but kind of expound upon it a little bit. Keith started the comments around how Amazon is becoming this massive behemoth, and this is something I've been talking about for several years now that really concerns me, especially from an enterprise perspective. Is if you're going to maintain that portfolio, as you grow that portfolio, and anyone who's run a product business understands this, at some point you really need to be thinking about rationalizing and pruning your portfolio. Amazon hasn't really gone through that process yet, right? And the core example is SimpleDB. It still exists from the early days. It may not be in the catalog, but there are still people within the team that manage that. Where this leads to customers and problems for customers is there are too many choices, right? To the comment about having just that easy button, the way I've articulated it in the past is there are some companies like web scale companies or startups that they just want the basic Lego building blocks because they're building at scale and they're looking for a very specific type of solution. But when you shift that conversation to the enterprise, they're looking for the preformed walls. They're not looking for nails and boards that they have to measure and cut. They're looking for a wall that they can just put up, or maybe even just a house they can put up and they can figure out what they want to do in terms of covering the walls. Amazon hasn't gotten there yet. I think they will eventually, and I'm encouraged by seeing some of the vertical conversations start to come up, but they've also struggled with that too. And I'm not sure whether they can cross that boundary. To be fair, Google has also struggled with this as well. I think Microsoft has done a fair job with it, but again, this is going to be a real challenge for each of these providers. Now, I will say that confusion equals opportunity. Confusion equals opportunity. And what that means is that by creating this confusing environment, it actually creates opportunity for companies like Amazon. And we start to see this play out in terms of bills that are coming to customers that they're not expecting because they start taking on additional services. And kind of to the earlier comment, Amazon is inexpensive or cheap. You get stuck on that. But then when you start to use those higher level functions, those higher level services, guess what? The meter starts cranking up and eventually you're realizing that maybe the value isn't there and you have to kind of figure out where to jiggle things around. So there's a lot to unpack there. This is not a simple, cloud is cheap or Amazon is great or bad. I mean, there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah, I think
You
on
know,
that note,
before
actually, go ahead. Sorry.
Tim, you hit a really interesting product management question that I had even before reInvent. Last count before reInvent, 185 services Amazon had in their catalog. That's an insane number of services. And as a customer, beyond the complexity, you can't outrun the genetics of business and IT complexity. I don't care who you are. Amazon does an amazing job at it, but at some point you get the flash media player effect that you build applications that you cannot retire because we've stopped investing in them and etc. Amazon, there's only so many people in the world that can build services the scale of Amazon can build. So as a customer, I'm asking myself, what services will Amazon eventually let fall to the wayside because they cannot run a marathon at a sprinter's pace forever?
Oh, it's even bigger than that in some ways because since they're a service, you don't have any choice when they decide to end of life it, they end of life it.
Right.
Right. I mean, this is one of the things this conversation is making me think through just how challenging it is. There is no market incentive right now that takes the three major players. And if you include Alibaba or something like that, it's even more extreme. to have them have any common standards, any interoperability, right? Those things are completely gone by the wayside, because there's no financial incentive at the moment for anybody to say, you know what, I really want to make sure that when I write my database, my data storage algorithms, that they're cross cloud because of skills or because of portability or because I want to be able to sustain it. And so I think that we're running headlong for very good reasons. The technology is fantastic and it's enabling great things, but long-term sustaining operations, we're not really talking about what that looks like. We are here, but Amazon doesn't. It's like, here's something new, squirrel.
Yeah, my advice to the consumers of the cloud is that consume it like with caution, kind of thing, right? So that don't just it's like a buffet, right? You go to buffet, you don't want to get sick eating, because it's all like you paid it, this one's free, even if it's free, like you don't want to get sick, right? So I believe cloud is a no-brainer for systems of innovation. Any new greenfield applications, you can build it there, and you will build it cheaper, faster, and they have all the facilities, you name it, APIs, you name it, right? But if you are talking about already running systems and moving to the cloud, that's where you have to think a lot more, I believe. Because at Rackspace, we used to have this one slide. I was in pre-sales there, did a lot of work there. Jan was there too for some time, I think.
Yeah.
Like we say, a unit of cloud is more expensive than a unit of cloud is more expensive than unit on-prem unit, right? On dedicated gear. We were selling dedicated gear on top of VMware as well. So it's the fact. I mean, there's a reason why Amazon is making money. Their margins are pretty good. I think 20+% or something on these things. So that makes you wonder, like, can I save that 20% by running it myself? But then why will you go to cloud? I think the lure of the cloud is the quickness, the agility. So you can cook up stuff and you can get a server on API. Once that thing is cooked, right? Once that recipe is made, and now you have to serve it, you can bring that to your own kitchen and then cook it there, because making the recipe is hard part, right? So experimentation is hard. I think cloud is great for experimentation. For other applications, I think people have to be a little more sort of cautious, if you will.
I actually don't think it's that simple, because you go quickly today from systems of innovation to systems of record and systems of engagement. So when you are trying to experiment, you're trying to quickly get to that system of engagement, which then starts to build the data set that ultimately becomes your system of record.
Yeah.
So those two are inextricably, connected together. In such a way that moving to cloud is not something you do for cost, as you said. Cloud is not cheaper. I mean, say that 3 times.
Yeah.
Cloud
Yeah,
is
it's
not
not.
cheaper,
Yeah.
but people do it because it actually offers something they can't get using traditional means, and it also gives them the freedom to be able to scale in ways they can't scale on-prem. And so, think of a company like Zoom, for example. Zoom hitting the pandemic, and I just saw a tweet earlier this afternoon that said something like they were adding 3,000 to 5,000 instances a day.
Yeah.
I mean, even if you took a fraction of that and said, okay, it's actually only a tenth of that, there's no way you can scale at that rate within a traditional means. And so I think it's important to understand that there are other advantages that cloud brings. Don't focus on the cost piece. But I do think on the other side of that, you have to focus on what value you're getting from it and understand where that comes in, so that when the bill comes, you can equate it appropriately.
So I think we have limited time. So like from the other technology suppliers or service providers point of view, what's your take? Like, who is getting like nervous about the new after the new announcements? Like it's always like, oh shit, like moments for so many startups and so many other companies when reInvent happens. Oh my god, they have got into my line of business. What's your take on it? Let's go with Anne first.
Well, I think it's going to be a moving game, right? Because they're moving so fast. And if you look at the R&D spend they've got, it's now comparable with Microsoft. And Microsoft's been going 20 years longer. So if you think about it, they've caught up rapidly, and they've got other streams to their business with obviously the Amazon consumer model. This is an engine that if they want to enter a market, they're going to enter it. And I've said that before. If they're not in it today, but they want to be, so it's not, I don't think it's worried about if they've come into your market. It's, you've got to think, how do you pivot to do something different so you're not head to head with exactly what they've got, because they're not going to take the whole market. You know, you could argue in the consumer market, there's still other suppliers. We don't buy everything from Amazon, although the pandemic has shifted a lot of our purchasing to accelerate there because of the needs of delivery. But same as the other markets, they're gonna pick other markets, right? They haven't finished. They're going to be the Walmart of their world. So they're going to choose where they want to go, come in, disrupt, and buy their way into that market. And what I'm waiting for is to see how they disrupt through acquisition, because that's the bit I've been waiting for, because they've got this stockpile of cash. Are they going to keep, to the point that was made earlier, they're not necessarily inventing, but at what point are we going to see them buying some other big market players and bringing them together? Because they can, if they want to do that and take Microsoft on, they can do it with cash quickly.
I don't think they want to do that. I mean, if they wanted to buy, you know, they could have bought, you know, Tableau last year instead of building their own environment. They could have bought Slack and said, we're going to go after, you know, Microsoft like Salesforce is doing.
Well, they could buy Salesforce, right?
Or they could buy Salesforce in itself. Yeah. So I don't, you know, if I'm, you know, an Amazon competitor, I'm looking at this and I'm like, you know, their game plan hasn't changed very much. They're still going after builders. They're still adding more services. They're still trying to be everywhere and everything to everybody. And, you know, what is new, I think, again, is that they're trying to provide more higher level application services. So if I'm a SaaS company putting out technology for developers, I'm a little scared about what I'm seeing. And if I'm Microsoft again, I'm saying, you know, Tim, going back to what you said, we wanted building blocks. Once we figured out how to run our data center, right? Once, you know, SANs and NAS became commonplace, once we had blade servers and the infrastructure started to get easier again, we said, give me the standard stack for .NET, give me the standard stack for Java, give me, you know, Oracle or SQL Server, or maybe both, and give me a standard way to deploy them and standard way to manage them. And if you're on an Amazon, you know, centric account, I see, you know, enterprises looking for that. We got one way to run data and analytics there, one way to run, you know, a .NET stack there, and going and investing in their own way to be able to standardize what they're deploying out there. And that's going to be the only way to combat that if you're on there. And there are other options going to be like, you know, there's something that's too hard to do there. Maybe Active Directory is just too hard to do in Amazon. We're just going to go do that on Azure.
You know, Isaac, you bring up a point, though, around these end user focused services. So things like Slack and Salesforce and Tableau, those are all services or applications that end users engage with. Amazon doesn't have a strong history of having those kinds of services and doing well with them. They've had a couple of challenges that they've brought to market, but have kind of met with tepid waters. I don't think that they need to go there. I think the opportunity is, for example, going from a database service that sits on top of infrastructure and you manage the infrastructure and the database service to it's a database service as a service. I don't want to have to worry about the things underneath it. So using my house analogy, it's not just the preformed walls, but I would not recommend Amazon try and go after a completely built house.
No.
I would still focus on how do we start to, for example, how do we bring a common security thread and architecture together to go from edge to cloud or across different stratas within the stack? I mean, Microsoft is starting to do that, for example, with some of the Intel technologies, but You have to, that's just one of many ways to do it, but I think you have to start thinking about some of these other core issues at that level. The other point that I'd make is that they're fighting along with Microsoft, along with Google for the same market. They're not really differentiating themselves yet. And I think that's the next stage here is they have to start kind of carving out their space of where their beachhead's going to be. But as it is right now, I have no idea what that might be. I mean, I can project and maybe guess, but they have to figure out how they're going to differentiate themselves.
Yeah,
So
I think
it's really interesting that one of the first vendors you mentioned, Sarbjeet, was at the beginning of the conversation was VMware. As I'm
I was
sitting
going to
here
go there.
listening,
Yeah.
I would actually love, as if I was a competitor or if I was in this space and I need to figure out how am I going to align and grow and compete with Amazon, somebody needs to have a sit down with Pat and figure out what conversation did he have with Andy that VMware is brought to the stage at AWS with alongside AWS. Andy Jassy is talking. If you look at that relationship over the past 3 years, it was kind of like VMware made a big deal of it. Andy Jassy was like, yeah, and we're doing this thing with VMware. And last year it was more highlighted. This year it is a thing. What is it that VMware and specifically Pat Gelsinger
We know what
positioned
it is.
themselves
I-
that they are now critical to the success of Amazon?
We know what
I
it
could
is.
say
It's a
it.
gold mine. It's a gold mine for them. It's because
Yeah.
that's where the workloads are, which they want, right? Which are
Well,
easy, ripe to go.
Well, the argument and people before this, and I was one of the people who said it when the deal was first made. I'm like, this is stupid. If I wanted to run VMs in the cloud, I just do EC2, and it's
I
not that
remember
simple.
our conversation about that.
We had that conversation. We
On
were
the jog, yeah.
me and you, Rob, had that conversation, and obviously customers are saying no, we don't want that. It's not that simple.
It's
'Cause
skills
it's
gravity.
not.
Skills gravity, because a lot of people know how to do VMware, and it's almost a standard in the data center for 20 years almost. Like they started 20 years back, right? So people learned it, and then the sysadmins loved
But it's
VMware.
it's not about I mean, this is the thing. I think, listening to this analysis with y'all, it's only a little bit about infrastructure. Right? This is, in a lot of cases, it's obviously now about AI ML, and they're going to really transform what type of tooling is happening in the back end. They don't want to buy, I mean, I'm listening to this, they don't want to buy one of these existing tools. They know that AI is going to transform how you build those tools in the future fundamentally. So they're not in a rush. They're doing all that work. They're building the infrastructure. You can't underestimate just how innovative they have been in the hardware side. There's a wave of hardware innovation coming to the industry, led by Amazon by example, with smart NICs, with some of these environmental designs, with AI ML attached to infrastructure for autonomic behaviors. That they're really looking at infrastructure in a very different way than the rest of the industry had been, and they're not doing it quietly anymore.
Hyperscalers, I mean,
that's
they're named
important.
they're hyperscalers for a reason. And having worked for the cloud providers, two of them, one mainly actually at Rackspace, we had real cloud, but Oracle we didn't almost. So is that like to be a great cloud provider, you have to know how to run data center with high level of efficiency. The cost, even at the like how you cool your servers and the power, the price of the power, where the data center is, you name it. Like if you don't know how to operate your data centers with high level of efficiency, you can't do it.
Yeah, but at some point you become so focused on that story that you lose what you're actually trying to accomplish.
That's right.
And those efficiencies, while really helpful to Amazon, come to Amazon, operate the way we think you should operate, and not the way the customer thinks you should operate.
I actually think that's distracting. when you go down that path of conversation. I don't think that's the core issue. And if I kind of bring this back to Keith's piece, and I'll be a little provocative, I think the real reason why, and it started with the initial conversation between VMware and AWS, and I think it's kind of gotten a little bit of a refresh this year, is Amazon, frankly, hasn't had as much success with the enterprise as they had hoped. I mean, they just haven't. And I think they are struggling in some corners, and they're really trying to make a change. And one of the ways you can make a change is to build a partnership, a closer partnership with someone that already has those relationships, and more importantly, that data and those workloads. Now, you would have thought that VMware on AWS might have, at least on the surface, garnered some of that help in the move. But I mean, it was kind of DOA in the sense that it really didn't offer the advantages that were initially touted. And so I think I think the problem here is that you have to kind of open up the aperture a bit and look at the bigger picture. And then you start to understand why these relationships come into play. But I think in the long term, VMware is going to have what they have. AWS will have what they have. It's going to be confusing. And frankly, there's a lot of opportunity to figure out how to help these folks use the right solutions for the right needs.
Yeah, Tim, I think you kind of teed it up, which was my initial thought in all of this, is that there's a lot of opportunity for people like us, frankly. This is my full-time job, is trying to figure this stuff out. And there are days, if not weeks, I'm lost. Like, I'm just like, I consume this stuff as a job, and I have trouble keeping up with it. And it's one of those things I realized last year, that my practice had to refocus on a niche hybrid infrastructure. That's what we do, because it's too big. I can't cover all of it anymore, because I could never cover all of it, but I can't cover all of it because it's too big, and I just need to rely on some of you smart folks to cover these areas that I just can't see.
Keith, we're relying on you. Come on, man.
Is that not the biggest problem of the the customer of this, is the lack of skills and experience on it, right? Because there's a world going on where this is being consumed rapidly and being pushed heavily across all of the big vendors, but the skill sets, there's not enough skills out there, and those skills are not cheap.
I think, Ian, that's part of the problem. Skills is definitely one issue, and skills for Amazon is different than skills for Microsoft, is different from skills for Google. But there's another piece to this too, which is just resources and priorities. This is only one component in my I have this iceberg model that I use, which basically says all of the projects, all of the needs that IT takes on are represented by that iceberg. And as we know, in an iceberg, some things are below the water and some things are above. All of the things that are on that IT plate, that iceberg, are really good projects to take on. The problem is that only the ones above the water will get the funding and resources to be able to carry it forward. So the question for any given vendor is, how do you get your project or your pitch to sit above the waterline? And I think part of the problem with many of these cloud efforts is that they sit on the iceberg, but they're below the waterline. And so skills just becomes another hurdle. Money, resources, priorities with something else. I mean, what's the advantage of moving a workload to cloud just on the surface? Probably nothing. And this is where things like digital transformation, another thing that's kind of dead on arrival, because just moving a workload from on-prem to cloud doesn't get you anything. You have to put it in the right context. And when you put it in the right context that has some business outcome, then it becomes meaningful. And I don't mean a more agile. I don't mean being able to respond faster. We got to get beyond those things. But I think this is really where the core issue is, Ian, is it's more than just skills. It's a really complicated I think Keith had mentioned this. It's a ball of yarn. and it's really hard to untangle.
Yeah, but I think Rob actually pointed at their true direction. I mean, their true direction is AI and analytics and edge. It's getting to the builders. You're right, Tim. They're not going after business users. They're going after the builders that can go do the equivalents. And when you look at things like analytics and you look at things that differentiating with edge computing, whether it's for health systems or for automated cars or smart cities, these are all the things that are going to push the envelope, and they expect the industry to fill the skill gaps, whether it's through education, whether it's through large consulting companies building up their skill sets around it. They expect that the innovation that they enable will drag the industry in with them. And so that's why you're seeing a lot of their discussion around analytics and AI. And to your point, not around, yeah, they're going to check the boxes around, more types of environments, but it's their new chips, it's their new ways of computing things that are going to enable, petabytes of data being processed faster. That's where they want to make their splash and compete over the next decade. Sarbjeet's on mute.
Is on mute.
Busted.
Busted. Problems of the first world. So yeah, actually, I think Jassy said that like speed is a choice. I think they are giving you speed, agility, just not the agility to bring up the environment, but also to like agility to sort of refactor it and then operate it at high speed, and performance is there, that they keep sort of giving you the same service at a lower price next year kind of thing, and because they add higher level of service, I mean higher speed service or better performance service next year, so they keep making you feel better, little sort of candy every year. I think they can do a lot more things in certain areas faster than they are doing it. I think they're doing it the way like Apple does it. I will give you a little bit every year. I don't want to give you too much right now. I think they are getting into that mode, the Apple mode, and on that note, actually, their Apple partnership is interesting one as well. Mobile, I think, is still has a long way to go in enterprise, and it just, I think that partnership was interesting.
But that gets to the builder comment, right? That Isaac was talking about. You're creating an environment that now I can build mobile apps and test them within the AWS environment. I can build the field of test and devices without having to build that out myself.
Yeah, and I said I sort of summarized that in one line. It's a democratization of another set of technology to another set of people. That's what it is. Like people in enterprise never coded on Mac and iOS applications much, right? And they mainly focus on Android in enterprise, and now they can. And also another set of people, because people in developing nations, they can't afford these heavy duty MacBook Pros and all that stuff, and they are on cheaper PCs. Kids in school, even people working in work environment, they are not given MacBooks or Mac computers. So now they can sniff that through the free tier and start writing iPhone apps, iOS apps, and I think it's a win-win for both Apple and Amazon. And I think they're spreading their wings into every direction. And on that note, I think a vendor like Amazon or AWS in this case can strangle themselves with the complexity of the portfolio, I believe, as you said earlier, Tim. So with that, I think we can last sort of round. I think we have covered all three bases. We focused on mainly on the consumer first, and then we intermingled the last two parts, the other vendors versus what Amazon will do. So I think the last round, let's go around and two things. One, where is Amazon headed, right? So what is in it for Amazon? And the second is your best advice for the consumers or the even the partners in this case. Let's put partners into the play as well. Like best advice, like how should they traverse this world? Yeah, this time Keith first.
Well, that's a tough one. Actually, I don't have really practical advice for customers coming out of AWS reInvent.
You
Whereas
want them to
Amazon,
come to you later. Yeah.
no, no, no. There is they should come to me later.
Yeah.
The
But I think this is
CTOadvisor.com.
the CTOadvisor.com. I've been trying to get CTOadvisor.com. It's abandoned, and the guy won't reply to me. But it is a mess. But it's a good mess because Amazon is pushing me out of my comfort zone. And as a partner, as a vendor, if you're not being pushed, if you don't feel like you're being pushed out of your comfort zone, you're doing something wrong, because Amazon has made me very uncomfortable over the past 3 weeks, and that's a good thing.
All right. Who wants to go next? Rob? Yeah.
I'll go next. Sure. I think everybody in the IT market should be sitting a little bit, watching over their shoulder a little bit more. I think Amazon has demonstrated that they have a lot of appetite to take on all of these markets. And I think they're about to be very disruptive in the hardware markets. And I think that to me is one of the big takeaways I have, especially with, they're coming very, very assertively into edge and enterprise spaces. People thought they had more time there. And my advice for somebody looking at this stuff is automate. As soon as you've and create abstraction layers. Even if you're decided to be all in on Amazon, if you're touching Amazon's UX and dependent on knowing what to click when, you're going to be in big trouble using Amazon. You're going to be even more in trouble if you decide to stop using Amazon. And so to me, there's a very big thing that Amazon is training the industry on how to live without Amazon. And at some point, I think that if you've developed those skills, you'll be in a good position. If you think you're just going to wake up, you're going to go to sleep and Amazon's going to take care of everything while you're sleeping, you're going to wake up one day and not be very happy. So use their stuff and build some defensive walls around yourself too.
Suck. Yeah.
I think my message to CIOs is they better keep things simple. Automate is part of keeping things simple, but Amazon is the FAO Schwartz, the big giant toy store with every single thing out there. They want you to consume all the candy and try all the different permutations. And, it sounds nice, but, we all know that's just going to bring a mound of tech debt over the course of time to every enterprise if they're playing with too many toys at the same time. And so, that CIO better sit down with their architects, sit down with their leads, sit down with their operators and say, I want simplified stacks. I don't want optimized. I don't want to have debates over serverless or, containers and PaaS. I want to find a couple of ways of doing things and make sure that we understand the cost around it, make sure we understand how to automate around it, and just keep the environments as simple as we can, because things are going to change. To you guys' point earlier, there's things that are going to shut down over the course of time that just not going to be able to sustain keeping everything running indefinitely. And even if they can, I don't think enterprise can do that anyway. So keep it simple, keep it automated, pick the things that matter, and standardize to a few stacks.
That's a lot of good stuff. Ian, next.
Yeah, first I agree with Rob's point, abstraction. I think you're going to end up with multi-cloud. I mean, it's the hyped term at the moment, but I just think it's the nature of the beast. It's no different from the world we all used to live in, where you would have different operating systems on different types of platforms from different vendors. And it's just they're different now. They're just different names, but it's the same mix, right? No one was ever only on a particular type of Unix or all netware. I worked in the mobile netware market, and that wanted to be all pervasive, but you'd have netware, and then over here there'd be a Unix box because of a particular business need and an application driven piece, and it'd be how you integrate the two. And I think we're in the same world, just with different names involved and different types of platform. So we're going to have multi-cloud. And I think you're going to end up with I think the other piece we hadn't discussed, but is I think you're going to end up with dependencies on these platforms through lack of your own choice, because you're going to find a SaaS provider is going to be on, they make their choice. You don't choose what they're typically on, right? And they're going to be on AWS or Azure, etc. So you're going to have some reliance on these platforms through third-party choices that you're not necessarily picking them yourself.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be interesting. I think the one big positive of it for me is innovation. All of this tech is offering, through whichever vendor you want to label it with, is we're going to see an incredible amount of continual innovation and new opportunities for new providers to come out with new things, and for customers to be able to buy new things that replace legacy systems that don't exist today. There's going to be someone coming out with something on AWS or Azure in the next couple of years that could be the next Uber, and we don't even see it coming yet. And it's facilitated based on what these platforms enable people to do. So there's bad, but there's also a lot of good from it, right?
Yeah. It's a mixed bag. Tim?
A couple things. We talked a little bit about the confusion, and there's just a lot to choose from. I think that's actually a dangerous place for enterprises. To Isaac's point, I mean, IT is already really complicated, and I don't care whether you think it should be or shouldn't be. It doesn't really matter. It is. And that's just the reality of where we are today. So bringing in additional complexity into the mix is incredibly dangerous for enterprises. And so if you look at it from a cost perspective, you look at it from an architecture perspective, heck, look at it from a cybersecurity perspective. I mean, complexity, you just can't get your arms around it. And so simplifying is going to be really, really important as we go forward. And to Isaac's point, I completely agree. If you're an IT leader, CIO or otherwise, and you're not thinking about how to simplify and streamline your environment, you're just asking for trouble. And so I think Amazon, unfortunately, kind of brings you the candy store, as was mentioned, but that could be really dangerous. The second piece, though, where this kind of becomes a bright spot is when you think about the partners in the ecosystem. Don't just look at augmenting what Amazon offers as services, but rather look ahead of what they're offering. Try and understand how the enterprise is evolving and how they're trying to kind of move up the stack, because Amazon's not there. And even if they wanted to be there, there are a couple of stages they have to go through before they can get there. But I think that opens a huge door for ISVs and SIs and smaller partners that want to step in and provide solutions that bridge the gap between what Amazon is providing and what an enterprise needs. And I don't think that's, to Ian's point, I don't think that's necessarily a SaaS offering. It could be, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. And so those two dynamics are going to be interesting to see how they play out. But I'm kind of leaning more toward the side of I'm concerned. I'm really concerned for the customer as we go through this, not because there's a lack of diversity and opportunity, but that there's actually too much of it right now.
Yeah, I think I'm concerned for ISVs and SIs and many other sort of segments of a bigger IT sort of business, if you will. Lay of the land, actually. I was talking to some university students, telling them like the careers in tech and all this stuff, and I was trying to put together that lay of the land slide, not the landslide, lay of the land slide, PowerPoint slide. Like what are the different sort of different sort of entities which serve this big sort of machinery, the digital universe, if you will. There are SIs, ISVs, and VARs, and technology providers, service providers, and then enterprises themselves and stuff like that. I think roles of them are changing. It's a lot of stuff is still up in the air. I think on just focusing core on cloud, I think automation, as you all have said, as Rob stressed it, is the key to get some control with yourself. I think companies like HashiCorp are trying to do that, and we need more more of HashiCorp like companies. Now we can't have another just one vendor trying to vendor neutralize the cloud, if you will, right? And HashiCorp is doing that. Take a look at them. I'm not getting paid by them or anything like that, but take a look at that solutions like that. And I think some open source projects will emerge to address that need. I usually say the bigger systems take care of themselves, right? Because market is so big, no vendor can twist the arm of the market and then say, okay, I want you to do it this way. If they push the market too much into certain direction, they will suffer, not the market. So I hope Amazon doesn't suffer by pushing the market too much into certain directions. And the one thing which is working in favor of them is that Amazon is the feature proximity, and developers love that. And because if I'm doing this, I want some ML. We talked about that. Isaac and I talked about that in week 2 of wrap up of Amazon event. So that I think that works in their advantage, but also at some point it can stop working in their advantage. I think with that, thank you very much, guys, for joining. I appreciate your time. I think we will talk more about partners in the future, and I will try to collaborate with you folks and get your 2 cents on different sort of aspects of this big market. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks.